I have my special guest. She is a speech language pathologist, none other than Miss Meagan Sardana.
Thank you for having me. It's great to join you.
Welcome, Miss Megan on Abstract Essay. Can you please introduce more about yourself that I know?
Sure. I am a speech language pathologist, and I worked in California schools for about 5 years, teaching kids speech and language skills. And I noticed that a lot of my kids had difficulty reading, but at that time, the school system was not screening for reading difficulties. And those kids that did need extra help reading were not necessarily being taught with a system that works for people who have dyslexia.
Well, Miss Megan, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world.
Mhm.
Thank you. And today let's talk about the definition of dyslexia, a sign that someone has dyslexia and treatment options.
Okay, great.
You're the founder of Small Talk SLP and have a dedicated your career to helping children find their voices and unlock their potential. What is the first drew you to speech language pathology? That was there a particular moment when you knew this is what you're calling?
Well, I love language and languages, and I wanted to help other people be able to communicate better. So I went to grad school, and now I'm working. Took a deeper dive into dyslexia once I had an inkling that people weren't being treated in schools. And so now I work and with people with dyslexia, and I use a system specifically designed to help them to read.
Interesting, Miss Megan. You specialize in early language development, dyslexia, and play-based therapy. How does this area interest in your daily work? Does the child struggling with reading often have underlying language challenges that need attention first?
Yes, that's a great question. A lot of early signs that you have dyslexia are oral language differences and difficulties. So, for example, your child might be a late talker. They might have difficulty learning vocabulary, and then they might switch sounds, and such as the word instead of saying spaghetti, say biscotti, or instead of saying butterfly, saying flutterby. Now, that's true of all children up to a particular age, but after the age of 5 or so, we want to see those disappear. And if they don't, that may be a sign. And then they might, in the vocabulary field, they might mix up words in a category. So, for example, um, under natural disasters, they might conflate tornado with volcano. Now, they know perfectly well what each of those things is, but they're just not accessing that. They have word finding difficulties. So, people with dyslexia have difficulty reading fluently, both with speed and accuracy. Okay, and this is due to underlying phonological awareness and phonological processing problems. So let's go back and break that down. People with dyslexia have difficulty reading. It's not that they can't read, they can read, they're just reading with a different part of their brain. Okay, and that we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But they are often missing what we call phonological awareness or phonological processing skills. So, phonology is the study of a sound system of a language. So, they need help with sound system skills. For example, are they able, before they ever start to read, uh, able to break down a sentence into words? Are they able to identify how many syllables a word has? And then there's a subset of these sound system skills called phonemic awareness skills, okay? And kids need to be able to take away or delete a phoneme. A phoneme is an individual speech sound. So, for example, p, t, or k. Okay. So, for example, if I give them a word such as cat and ask you to take away the k sound and say, what word do we have? That word, of course, is at. Then you need to be able to add a sound. If I ask you to add a b to the beginning of that word, what word do we have now? And of course, that word is bat. And then they need to be able to substitute a sound. So if I said, now I want you to change the b sound for a f sound. Now what word do we have? It's fat. And before you read, by the age of 5 or 6, you should have these skills down. Okay?
Ms. Megan, dyslexia affects an estimated 5 to 15% of people, yet so
Yes.
many children go undiagnosed for years. If you could change one thing about how our school and medical system currently identify and support these children, what would it be?
Okay, so we need to stop using a system where we're waiting for kids to fail. This is the first year in California state history where our public schools are screening for reading programs for kids in kindergarten through second grade. That's about 5 to 7 years old. So we need to allow people access so that they can participate in reading. And the other piece of that is once they are identified, they need to figure out what the reading problem is due to, and then the treatment has to be specific for that problem. So they need to treat specifically for dyslexia, and there are systems that are designed to do just that.
Very well said. Very well said, Miss Megan. Many parents wonder if their children struggle with reading. This is just a phase or something more. What are
Mm-hmm.
the earliest red flags you look for, perhaps even in preschool, that suggest a child might need evaluation?
Excellent question. If they're a late talker, and then those other things I talked about before, having difficulty learning words, perhaps they have difficulty expressing themselves. Okay, so about 50% of kids with dyslexia have developmental language disorder. And that is, can you understand what I'm saying? And can you express what you want? So those are some of the early signs of dyslexia.
Interesting, Miss Megan. You mentioned that revising letters like B, D, or P, Q is common in young children without dyslexia. How can a parent tell the difference between typical development errors and persistent signs that warrant concern?
Well, if they have a concern, the best thing to do is to go to a speech language pathologist. So if they're having difficulty saying the sounds in the correct order, that's a big red flag. If they're certain saying certain things after different ages, then they may have a speech or language disorder. For example, if they are fronting a sound after the age of about 3 or so, they may have a difficulty with language or speech. So what that means is sometimes the back sounds like k and g are made in our throat, and those are harder to pronounce. Those aren't some of the first forming sounds. So what children will do is they'll substitute it for a front sound, such as t or da. Now that's typical language development, but after a certain age, you want to see that drop. And especially if your child is already 5 years old, then you want to make sure that you're getting in to see a speech language pathologist. And learning words, a child by the age of 2 years old should already have 50 words. So if your child doesn't have that many words, we need to get in there early, and we need to take care of that. That's a sign of a language or learning disability.
Ms. Megan, the diagnostic process involves psychologists, reading specialists, and speech language pathologists working together. Can you walk us through what comprehensive evaluation actually looks like from a parent's perspective? How long
Yeah,
does it take and what happens afterward?
yes. Okay, so when we get at the school district, information that a child needs an individualized education plan. We then have 60 days to evaluate that child and write a report. And like you said, it is a team effort. So the school psychologist, the speech language pathologist, the teacher, and the parent, and uh, other people that work at the school are all involved, and even the nurse will do that. So we look at, I would always test for vocabulary and syntax, or the word order and complexity of kids' language, and then look at their usage. Are they using language correctly in different social situations? Okay, and then the psychologist looks at phonological processing, and they often do an IQ test depending on the student. And so they look at language from different aspects as well. And then the nurse, of course, will check for hearing. So once the school decides we need to do an IEP on this child, then they have 60 days to do that in the state of California.
Interesting, Ms. Megan. In the US, parents can request an evaluation through their child's public school. What's the
Yes.
difference between the school based evaluation and private one? And when might family choose one over the other?
Okay, so the evaluation is going to actually be very similar, but the difficulty lies in interpreting the results. And so, if the parent is really convinced that their child needs special education services, then they can get an outside evaluation. And often the district will pay for that if they request that. And so, an outside evaluator might go in and look at more detail, and they might look at more functional language and decide that yes, this child falls below the 7th percentile, which is the standard for California schools. And therefore, they should have services. So if you are really adamant and you want an independent uh, evaluation done, you may ask for that. You may request that.
Certainly, yeah, you can request. The gold standard for dyslexia treatment is structured multisensory literacy instruction. So, can you paint a picture of what looks like in a therapy session? Are we talking flashcards or something more creative?
Uh, it's actually more creative. So we'll go back to those phonological awareness problems. So yes, you want to use an Orton-Gillingham based system. Okay, so what's Orton-Gillingham? Well, it's as much as a who question as a what question. So Dr. Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham worked in the 1930s to identify people with dyslexia, and even back then they could identify that this was a phonological or sound system problem. Okay, and then they developed ways to teach people with dyslexia to read. And specifically, you just brought up two very good ones. It has to be sequential, it has to be explicit, it has to be systematic, and as you said, it has to be multisensory. Okay, and
Mhm.
so yeah, and then eventually you want to get it to be a phonics system as well. So the phonics is matching the sound to the letter, but you can't do that until you have those phonological awareness skills. So a typical session, if we're just beginning, might look like this. Okay, multisensory. I would say a word or a part of a word, such as ack. I'll have the student repeat it, ack, and then they will use a kinesthetic movement to get that to solidify in their brain. So then they have to go through and say it slowly, ack. And then I will have some, to start, blank tiles of different colors. And then they'll pull down one tile of a different color for each different sound they hear. Okay, and then I'll have them touch under those tiles, again, kinesthetic or movement, okay, and repeat those sounds again. Ack, they'll repeat them separately. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're using all the senses and all of the ways people learn best in order to solidify the skill. So for example, some people, as we know, are visual learners, some people are auditory learners, and some people are kinesthetic learners, and that's movement and touch. So those are the best ways to help reinforce the skills. Now, eventually, as you might imagine, if you're going through and doing this while you're reading a book, that's not going to work. All right, so once you get proficient in those skills, then we're going to be able to fade out those cues, and they're going to start being able to read with letters, and then they're going to start to be able to read with black and white tiles, and they won't have to do all the movement. They're going to be more proficient.
Ms. Megan, assertive technology like audiobooks and speech to text software can be life changing. At
Yes.
what age or stage do you introduce those tools, and how do you ensure they use the support rather than crutches?
Okay, so you might not use speech to text immediately, but text to speech works wonders in so many ways. And I want them, kids, to start with this in the form of audiobooks at as young an age as possible. So maybe at 3 years old, when they understand more language, instead of watching a video in the car, I want them listening to a book in the car. And there are many reasons for this. This is going to help them grow their vocabulary. This is going to help them hear complex sentences for the first time. Okay, and it helps with their imagination. So it's very important, parents, because the language in a cartoon or in a TV show is much lower than it is in a book. So for example, you're not going to have the complex vocabulary. And because it's more dialogue, you're not going to get that sentence structure as much as you would in a book when somebody is describing something. So when I had my kids, we used to listen to The Magic Tree House in our car. So that's a whole series of books where kids take adventures in a magic tree house. But find something they love and then go with that. So no matter what special needs your kids have, if they're very specific interests, say trains, then find books, audiobooks on trains, and start listening to those. That's a phenomenal way to combat developmental language disorder and to get your kids on the right track.
Well said. Well said, Ms. Megan. You closely with the parents, teachers, and other professionals. What are the most common misconceptions you encounter from teachers about dyslexia and how they get gently corrected?
Okay, so I think that there are assumptions made that are incorrect about a child's intelligence. Having dyslexia has absolutely nothing to do with your intelligence. And what kids do when they're comparing themselves to others in the class, say most of the kids in the class are reading and they're not, is they ask themselves the question, what's wrong with me? Right? So they really internalize that. So I don't want the kid doing that, and I don't want the teacher doing that either. So we need to reframe this. The most important question that you can ask yourself if you have dyslexia or ask about your student is, what's right with me? Okay, so this is a neurodiverse condition. That means that their brains function differently. And that means that they come to the table with so many amazing skills. For example, the strengths with dyslexia that we need to realize and lead with are people have excellent visual thinking skills. For example, the director Steven Spielberg, he has dyslexia, and he has credited that with a lot of his success as a director and being able to see things before he makes them. Connected to that is spatial awareness. Okay, so being able to see something 3D in your head. A lot of our engineers and our physicists have dyslexia. So, and people with dyslexia are highly sought after in those fields more and more. People with dyslexia are really good at pattern recognition. So being able to see the pattern in, say, computer programming or even linguistics. And another thing that people with dyslexia are great at is holistic thinking. For example, Chef Jamie Oliver has dyslexia, and he went in and looked at the British school lunch system, and he completely changed it from the ground up. And it wasn't easy to change that system, but his ability to see that really helped with the process. And then finally, people with dyslexia have amazing empathy skills. That doesn't just mean what I can feel what you're feeling and I understand you. It means being able to read a social situation. Means being able to read the room. So this is great. A lot of actors such as Whoopi Goldberg and Keira Knightley have dyslexia, and that helps them in their ability to do things. So teachers, please do a deeper dive into dyslexia, and we need to pick out our students' strengths and know what they are. And just one more word about that. If you want to take a deeper dive into dyslexia, please go to the website for the International Dyslexia Association. Okay, that's dyslexiaida.org. Okay, there is an absolute wealth of information. You can read all sorts of tips for parents. There's scientific studies that you can read. So I wanted to add that as well, because that's a great resource for anyone, including educators.
Miss Megan, thank you for the tips.
Mhm.
And for other question, for a parent who just received a dyslexia diagnosis for their child and feels overwhelmed with worry, how do you want them to know about their child's future? Can you share a story of a former client who is thriving now?
Yes. So parents, first of all, I want to address uh, your concerns and your feelings, perhaps not just of worry, but guilt, because dyslexia is hereditary in many cases, not all cases. So you might have the reaction, oh no, I gave this to my child. And I just want to remind you that there is absolutely nothing wrong with your child. There's nothing wrong with their intelligence. And there's nothing wrong with your parenting. Um, so I, as an educator and someone who has studied language, work with dozens of children, but a parent only has one or two children these days on average. So you're not going to recognize all the different developmental milestones that they may be missing. So it's okay And I would say I would direct you to International Dyslexia Association website again, and then you can find different tutors uh, and who specifically teach an Orton Gillingham system for people with dyslexia. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Miss
Okay.
Megan. Thank you so much. And to wrap up our discussion for today, looking ahead, what excites you most in your field? Are there a new research findings, technologies, or advocacy movements that gives you hope for the next generation of children with learning differences?
I would say that um, the we can talk a little bit about brain differences here because yes, there is technology that gives me hope, specifically scientific methods such as functional MRIs. Okay, so that will show us that in the reading brain of a typical person, we have areas that are lighting up that are not lighting up in readers with dyslexia. So, for example, the angular gyrus in the left hemisphere is where we have that phonics piece, where our visual information, seeing a T, then corresponds with a sound, T. And so now that we can see this and see then that people with dyslexia are compensating with right hemisphere function, then we know now more specifically exactly what's going on. So this is going to help us drive um, more technology, more research. But I will say that one of the oldest things, it's almost 100 years old now, is Orton Gillingham. So it's really important to learn about that system. And there are several different programs then that are Orton Gillingham based. So look for those, such as Wilson Reading, or I'm trained in Barton Reading and Spelling. So, yeah.
Beautifully articulated, Ms. Megan. And so, can you please invite our listeners to support your business or projects that you want to promote on Abstract Essay?
Yes, if you want more information about me, my website is buythebooktutor.com. And there, if you scroll down to the resources area, I have some links that will take you to different websites where you can learn more. And there's a link to a movie too that talks about dyslexia, and you really see the emotional effects of dyslexia. So hop on there and email me at Meagan, that's MEAGAN, at buythebooktutor.com if you have any questions.
Indeed, people, let's support Miss Meagan Sardana, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering dyslexia projects will rise. So, Miss Megan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.